I'm your host, Mark Evans, and today we're talking about a topic that gets plenty of attention: pricing. It's easy to get caught up in competitive benchmarks, cost plus models, or sales driven discounting, but effective pricing goes deeper. It's strategic, it's customer informed, and when done right, it becomes one of the most powerful levers for sustainable growth. To help us get it right, I'm joined by Dan Balcauski, the founder of Product Tranquillity and one of the top pricing strategy experts in SaaS. Dan works with companies to move beyond gut decisions and build thoughtful, scalable pricing and packaging models that reflect how customers actually buy. Let's dig in. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Good to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Why don't we start with a big picture trend? A growing number of B2B SaaS companies are moving away from flat fee subscriptions, the old model, the bronze, silver, gold package model, towards more dynamic and hybrid pricing strategies. What macro forces do you think are driving this shift? And what operational or system level implementations should finance and RevOps leaders be preparing for when they're rolling out things like usage-based pricing, milestone billing, or tiered hybrids?
You packed a lot into that question.
Let's break it down.
I don't think there's anything more trendy than what's happening with the world of AI. And that is causing a lot of very cool innovation. I don't think it's ever been a more exciting time to be in the technology space with the influx of these state-of-the-art large learning models and other Gen AI technologies, image or video generation. And it's causing companies to fundamentally rethink their platforms, the use cases and value that they can provide. And it's also introducing a significant variable cost component that is introducing to the software industry, which is traditionally run on near infinite contribution margins for incremental cost to serve, network storage and compute for the incremental customer use case. And that's becoming a real component that folks are having to look at, besides the industry-wide norm of large fixed costs. Companies are used to that cost of development, but now they're really having to adopt in this new world. And I think there's, along with that, many components of experimentation on, we're not really sure what we could use this technology for, what capabilities it provides. Often there's some really good thinkers out there in the AI world. One of the guys I follow is a gentleman named Ethan Mullick. He's a professor at University of Pennsylvania, and he refers to the jagged frontier of these AI capabilities. What that means in practice is what may look really cool on a demo you put into production, and you find out all the myriad of corner cases where that actually doesn't solve the use case you thought. That's causing a lot of interesting conversations and iteration on that front, while you also have potentially the folks in the CFO office looking at a large and growing new line item on their P&L going out the door to OpenAI or Anthropic or one of these other large model providers. That's probably the dominant macro trend. Layer on to that the macro trend in software in general, where 2020 to 2022 was the free money party, 0% interest rates. COVID fueled spend on tools to enable the entire world to start working remotely, which you saw reflected in the valuations of software companies, everyone from Zoom on down. And then things came back to earth, the public markets corrected, and then that was reflected in the private markets. And all of a sudden, this mantra of growth at all costs also came under pressure, where a lot of companies said, hey, we no longer can just funnel infinite amounts of spend into sales and marketing and development with this idea that we're going to have a winner take all and just add value. And folks are really trying to understand, okay, as we add these capabilities, what is an appropriate monetization strategy? So I think those two major trends have been the dominant ones in the software space. I'll stop there. I know you asked a whole bunch about the CFO and revenue operations. Anything you want to touch on in what I just said?
No, not at all. But I do want to circle back because obviously I started this podcast with a huge, multifaceted question, and maybe we should break it down. And I want to focus on the two aspects that you talked about: the emergence of AI and the fact that a lot of these AI powered companies are iterating extremely quickly. New product launches are happening almost overnight. And the other side of the coin that a lot of B2B SaaS companies are having to navigate is the fact that they need to generate revenue. It's all about the bottom line. As you said, free money has disappeared and it's all about driving revenue growth, driving conversion. Let's circle back and focus on those two juicy topics. Number one is AI and how the emergence of AI and AI powered companies is impacting the whole pricing environment, where pricing can be very fluid, it can be experimental. There's different ways that you could price AI products. What are best practices now? What are some of the things that companies need to embrace to leverage AI in a way that makes sense economically and in terms of attracting users?
You hinted at something in your intro to that question, which is really important. There's this underlying thread across all companies we're seeing right now, which is heavy on moving fast and experimentation. We see this with the folks who are the fastest rising stars, whether that's OpenAI, Cursor, Windsurf, in the AI powered IDE space, the customer support agent space. You mentioned you're seeing huge amounts of releases. This is the old phrase. It was like nothing happens for years and then years happen in a day. We're seeing a lot of that where you have a week on the calendar and every model company has major upgrades. All the enabled applications have major upgrades and it's overwhelming to keep up with. But I think that idea of agility and experimentation is very important because it's very there. If you look at broad technological megatrends, this is one of them where, put into context, the automobile, electrification, the internet, where people are out there trying a bunch of new business models, trying to figure out, okay, we've got a new way to reach customers. We've got new capabilities. How could we put that into practice? And you're going to see a lot of those fail. And that's one, I say, par for the course. That all said, I think that there's so many different areas to go with this. I think that as you're making those experiments or making those changes, I think it's also never been clearer that good communication with new and existing customers is becoming more and more apparent, because if there's one thing that drives a customer to get angry with a vendor, it's I've got a unexpected change in my pricing model. I've got an unexpected bill I wasn't set up for. And I'm not sure when this will go live, but this example of this happened even a few weeks ago with one of these IDE providers, where underneath the hood, they changed some usage limits that wasn't clearly communicated. And if you're a denizen of the internet like I am, the Reddit threads just blew up of everybody like, what did they change? Oh my God, we just signed a contract for $10K for a year. And we've already one of our team members already blew through our entire team's usage capabilities for the entire month in a day. I would say marrying those two things and understanding that experimentation is warranted, but it also puts the pressure back on the business to make sure that they're in clear communication with their customers about what's going on.
The two parts of the equation are you've got pricing and you've got on the other side of costs. A company can go to market with with set pricing for AI powered services. But at the same time, it's also probably buying services from third parties. It could be through OpenAI, it could be through Perplexity. How do you maintain pricing discipline when your costs may be volatile? What are the things that B2B SaaS companies need to think about so they have pricing that is predictable or sustainable and doesn't surprise or even shock end users?
There's a couple of patterns that we see emerging. So I would say, just to set some stakes in the ground, any pricing exercise is going to be a mix of inputs around your costs, your customer value, your customer perception of value and willingness to pay, and your competitive alternatives. I don't think we've been in a situation where any of those are all changing simultaneously as fast. That said, I think there's a couple of things that I'm seeing and then also talked about that are maybe different from what I'm actually seeing in practice. So I think the first is there's a lot of shouting from the rooftops that the seat-based pricing model is dead. There are scenarios in which seat or user-based pricing metrics were never the ideal scenario, but a company could get away with it because they didn't have to consider significant changes in variable cost. I think the other thing, just to add on as well, just overall to my point on cost versus customer value, I think the cost element is interesting in terms of the new variable cost line item, because that part is very tangible and measurable. There's dollars going out the door, or the CFO is looking at that line item. But the customer value, as we were talking about earlier, is still a little bit vague as companies are trying to figure out what is actually valuable. And so I think there's a mindset where you could end up in very different positions with your pricing that are totally legitimate depending upon what your goals are. So what do I mean by that? We can think potentially in two different dimensions. I want to focus mostly on monetization, or I want to focus mostly on adoption. And depending upon how your company weights those goals, you may decide to take very different approaches. That being said, in order to adopt these new capabilities, we're seeing, I would say, probably two primary patterns. One is a re-examination of the company's pricing metric. So is that per seat, per API call, per document? And so what folks are looking at is, okay, is that the right metric? Is that how our product scales with value? And does it allow us to also scale with costs simultaneously? And so what you're seeing there is either a wholesale change to a different pricing metric, or you're seeing companies layer on potentially additional pricing metrics. So meaning if I have a per seat model and then I add in an additional per transaction, per document, per automation that I create, that can work depending upon your go-to-market motion. This is where the nuances really start to matter. If you have a very high volume velocity, low touch go-to-market motion, I would be cautious about layering on a second pricing metric. If you're buying a CRM, Mark, and you're the CRO, head of sales, I say, hey, Mark, how many sales guys do you have? Oh, I got 100. All right, cool. It's $10 a user. That'll be $1,000 a month. Easy. Now, if I say, okay, how many custom reports do you create a month? Even if you know that, all of a sudden you've now got one number times first metric A times second number. All of a sudden we need a spreadsheet or a calculator. Even if you're a math nerd like I am, it makes your head explode, which is not what you want in a high volume, low touch go-to-market motion. So what is an alternative to that? We've seen this with companies. So I'll stay in the CRM space, like Pipedrive. They have AI-enabled capabilities, and they've added those capabilities in the higher tiers of their offering. So we've got, I think they have 5 or 6 different tiers at this point. You imagine adding those capabilities into the top 2 of those in order to drive upsell. But the idea being, hey, we're not actually going to change our fundamental pricing metric. We're going to monetize by the fact that people are now upgrading to these higher tier offers. And we feel like we can cover the cost component completely within that same model. That works really well if the capabilities that you're adding are amplifying the existing value drivers of your business. So what do I mean? In the Pipedrive case, the idea of a CRM is that you're helping the business drive more revenue fundamentally. And you're doing that by making the individual sales folks more efficient. You're giving them a consolidated view. You're giving them a way to manage all their pipeline. If I give you a capability, hey, summarize all the interactions that I've ever had with Mark so that when I show up on this call, I know what his pain points are. I know what other products he's bought. I know all the support information that he has. So I could treat him like a person and not just the next guy I have on the phone. That's making my job better. Where that breaks down, or where we're seeing a deviation from that, is something like we've got a new AI SDR agent. So instead of your human SDR going into your CRM and doing what a human SDR does, we've now got this agent running on the side that is just feeding leads to your account executives and qualifying them, etc. So in those cases, what we're seeing the pattern is of something like what Intercom is doing with their FinAI. In that case, it's customer support, but the same thing applies where they have their good, better, best model based on a user basis. And then they have their FinAI support agent as an add-on that is priced on a per customer ticket resolution. Last time I looked, it was like 99 cents per resolved ticket. In that case, they're layering on as an add-on because it's creating a net new value driver. Hey, we have this capability that's going to run in the background completely orthogonal to how many humans you may have in your environment. And it's going to deflect a bunch of support requests on behalf of you. And therefore, we're going to create a new module and have it be priced with this other alternative pricing metric. So there's other directions and nuances, but I think those are 2 of the primary patterns that I'm seeing right now.
There's a thread between AI and then the increasing pressure to generate revenue and ultimately profitability, driven by the fact that money isn't free anymore. In our world, in the new world, what we're seeing is the emergence of hybrid pricing. So you can start with seat-based, but you can also layer on usage-based pricing or access to the API. And often what we're seeing is that it's a multi-pronged approach to pricing, and services are being bundled as opposed to buying one-offs. And the 2 things happen. One is it gives companies different ways to purchase products, software products. But at the same time, it also, and probably going back to our original thesis, it also gives companies more opportunities to generate revenue in different ways and to grow their revenue as companies use more of a product or use more of an API. Do you see a connection between what's happening in AI and the different pricing models that are emerging with things like usage and API calls and the need for companies to drive revenue and drive profitability? Is there a direct connect between these 2 trends that we're seeing?
I think there's a couple things going on. One is, I think I referred back to one of these AI-enabled IDEs and their pricing shenanigans that blew up on social media a few weeks ago. One thing I think we all should have a skeptical eye towards is we see these, I don't know if you see these charts, but they show months to revenue. So the revenue on the y-axis and then months on the x-axis. And like, how long did it take Facebook to hit 100 million revenue? How long did it take Google to hit 100 million? And those curves keep getting shorter and shorter. And I think we have to take those with somewhat of a grain of salt, because if I think about what's going on as it pertains to this, it's gone out of fashion now, but there was this meme in the tech sphere for a while of, oh, these new products are just GPT wrappers. We heard that, ChatGPT wrappers. Those companies, they're publicly stating revenue, but they're not talking about profitability. And I don't have any inside information of what happened there, but I imagine that those profitability numbers, I know how much these models underlying cost, especially for the ones that are on the state of the art. And although that price curve is changing dramatically, it's still a large amount of money. And so you could easily find yourself at a potentially negative unit margin for customers if you're not careful. So I think there's the tech is funny because we find these waves to surf, and you and I were probably beneficiaries for 5, maybe 10 years of VC subsidized Uber rides, because VCs were like, this is going to be winner take all. We're going to funnel billions of dollars into this, even if it's not cost optimized, because we believe in it. And so we have a little bit of that going on in AI, but I think not everyone is so lucky. Some people have access to that capital, others don't. Other folks are like, I don't want institutional capital. I'm going to bootstrap. I've got to be cash flow positive in order to stay in business. So we do see both sides. It's hard to talk in absolutes.
When you mention these companies that are growing quickly and whether they're actually making money, you look at a company like Lovable right now, which is the ball of the ball in terms of AI-powered SaaS products. Apparently, according to a recent story that I read, they made $75 million in 7 months. The author asked this question, but is it nailing pricing? And I guess what he's saying is, yes, revenue is growing, but the one question I would have in terms of pricing and economic stability or corporate stability is whether they're actually making money on that. And with AI, one of the challenges is that your cost can be variable. So you can start off with a low group of users and low costs, but then as you scale, your costs could go up. So it must be very challenging to operate in these environments when you can't depend on VC money. Ultimately, as you say, the economics are, how much are you selling your product for, and how much is it costing you? And it strikes me as for a lot of companies, very challenged right now.
The other underlying thing, you mentioned Lovable. I could name 5 Lovable competitors off the top of my head, and for all intents and purposes, I view them as totally interchangeable. And the word on the street is that if you build a project in one, and then I've got now weekend project 2, I could go switch over to one of their competitors tomorrow and build that, and there's no ingrained flow. And underlying model providers are dealing with this, and I'm a paying customer of Google for Gemini, Anthropic for Claude, and OpenAI for ChatGPT, and I switch between them on an hourly basis because I like the answer it's giving me for this question. I like the answer it's giving me for this question. So there is some amount of easy come, easy go. As I mentioned, those pillars at the beginning, your costs are one component, but your competitive alternatives. I think there's a pressure there to find revenue that people are willing to pay, because there is a ceiling of, actually, there's almost an equivalent feature set. So also, it could be very much easy come, easy go. It wasn't that long ago with Microsoft, and if we're saying in this AI IDE space, that GitHub Copilot was like, oh man, they're so far out ahead. They've got the lead, and then they've just been smoked. And to a certain extent, I don't know the internal revenue numbers of that business line for Microsoft. These other companies are publishing theirs. Potentially they have a more enterprise focus, which might be long-term stickier customers. But these are all things that you need to consider when you're in such a dynamically changing market, and understanding that in this market, whether it's founders or VCs behind them, they may not be what you might consider rational economic actors in that scenario, because they're trying to play a different game where they're trying to juice their numbers for an acquisition, or what seems to be happening more recently, an acqui-hire by one of the larger companies in the space as they hit some top line metrics. But you have to understand what that reality is and then make adjustments accordingly.
It's interesting what you say about Lovable and lots of different companies that walk and talk the same. We could go down a rabbit hole in terms of brand positioning and the value of brand. And Lovable, if you look at their marketing, they've done an amazing job of driving brand awareness, of building community. There's a whole thread on how they've leveraged social media and SEO to attract new users and ultimately new revenue. But that's probably a discussion for another day. I did want to turn my sights to omnichannel. According to Gartner, the average B2B SaaS buyer touches more than 10 channels before they actually make a purchase. This has caused many companies to embrace the omnichannel approach to sales. I'm interested in getting your take on the emergence of omnichannel and the biggest challenges facing companies when they're selling products on their websites, in app, through partners, or through direct sales, and some of the pricing challenges that they're going to face because you've got discounting going on that can happen talking to a sales rep, and it could happen through a partner, but it may not happen on a company's website. So how do you marry the SaaS pricing landscape with the fact that companies are approaching an omnichannel approach? They're selling everywhere and anywhere.
So when it gets into channel partnerships versus direct, this is one of these areas where it really depends upon what the goal of the business is and the design of that channel partnership program. The pricing nuances there are usually less of a consideration. There's usually many other stack ranked problems that come above pricing when it comes to those relationships. There's some legal restrictions. For example, the original vendor or OEM is not allowed to dictate the selling price that the channel sells it to the end customer for. That's called vertical price fixing. And there's like almost every jurisdiction in the world has some legislation around it. This is why when you buy a car, there's an MSRP, that's a manufacturer suggested retail price. They cannot demand that the dealership sell at that price, but it helps set an anchor point in the marketplace. So you can take approaches like that. I was actually listening this morning to DHH, who was one of the founders of 37 Signals at Basecamp. Hey, he's now got a new platform called Once. I'm done with subscription. We're going back to the world of perpetual software. We used to just buy the product once. He had a good interview with Lex Friedman where he was talking about when they launched Hey is a Gmail competitor. He thought Gmail was their biggest worry. It wasn't until they went and launched the Hey app on iOS that he realized that actually the big problem there was going to be Apple. I think it is a nice example that folks can relate to, folks who haven't been watching the news. Apple just lost a major antitrust lawsuit against Epic Games. Apple and Google with Android, but Apple is one that most people care about because it has access to the highest paying cohort of customer segment, where they have basically a toll booth on development. They charge 30% fees. You have to use their payment rails. You could not, I'll have to put this in past tense, use external pricing systems. Where you may have run into this is if you ever were on the Amazon app on your Android or iOS and you find a nice Kindle book that you want to buy, you can't actually buy through the app. You have to go on Amazon's website. That's all due to these restrictions. Furthermore, if, say, you have an app that has a front end and you want to sign customers up through that app, you were forced to use the payment rails of Apple. What does that mean? That means you don't have access to the customer information. Anything that modifies the transaction or the commercial relationship is a huge pain because it's really difficult to offer things like discounts, different types of pricing, refunds. If you have a customer and they are a customer of yours on iOS and they migrate into the Android ecosystem, there's not an easy way for you to transfer that commercial relationship over. Props to the leadership at Epic for, I think the episode they were saying, I think they spent $100 million on legal fees winning this battle against Apple. And now Apple is also found in criminal contempt of court for actually violating the first ruling. They pissed the judge off so much. So thankfully to them, but I think it puts into focus challenges that if you're going through a distributor or channel partner in any B2B SaaS, these are things to make sure to watch out for, because who owns that commercial relationship? Who owns the ability to sell that product, sell additional products? And if they want to upgrade, how is that managed? I think the individual sort of pricing components of that, again, tend to be a little bit less relevant than people think on first blush. Because usually there's the math generally works out where it's, hey, we're paying our sales folks some amount of fixed fee plus commission, and there's enough margin to play with there that like we don't have to mess with the end customer selling price in order to make the math work. That usually there's nuances there, but for software businesses is usually not a big complication. But having that commercial terms and the flexibility there to make changes is something you should definitely keep an eye out for.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Circle back with a topic that we explored earlier, and that's around different pricing models and the challenges that B2B companies face when they're trying to drive revenue, trying to control costs, but also trying to be economically competitive. And two of the biggest ones these days are usage/consumption and API. So a lot of companies, SaaS companies, are depending on third parties for data calls. They're also no longer charging, selling them using licenses, flat fee licenses, but also based on usage as well. Like a company like OpenAI, for example, which has a flat fee service, but also a usage fee. What are some of the pricing challenges that companies face when they're implementing things like usage-based services or API calls? And what advice would you give B2B SaaS companies that want to iterate quickly on pricing, but they don't want to create chaos in quoting, billing, and revenue forecasting?
Yeah. I'll make a distinction here between the AI foundation companies and the AI enabled applications. AI foundation companies being OpenAI, Anthropic, Google Gemini, and then AI enabled applications who are leveraging that. So one way to think about the relationship there is as a utility model. And some of the leaders of these AI labs have talked about it. Hey, you have intelligence on tap. You have water coming out of your tap faucet in your kitchen or bathroom. And so from that perspective, if we look at someone like OpenAI, they actually have both. If you go to ChatGPT, that is an AI-enabled application that is using the OpenAI GPT model in the background to service your requests. They have a pricing model there that is per seat basis on a fixed monthly fee. They have got a freemium version, a free tier. They've got a plus $20 a month, and they introduced a pro tier at $200 a month. That's different from their API business. I think this is an important nuance because why do they have that? It's true that ChatGPT itself is being used pretty much by everyone at this point. Probably fastest product. It's one of the ones on that chart of fastest to 100 million. And now I think they're encroaching on 5 or 10 billion depending on the latest fundraising news. So just an insane amount of growth. But if we look at ChatGPT, that's much more of a consumer model versus the API is probably much more of a B2B use case. Why is that distinction important? I see a lot of this getting confused where I was talking to one expert before and they were saying, oh, it'd be great if Netflix actually charged me by how many movies I watched that month because some months like I don't have any content I want to watch. I think that's terrible advice. You do not want to introduce usage components in a B2C context. I think they've made smart decisions in staying away from that for something like ChatGPT or the equivalents for the other providers. But on the B2B side with the API, B2B customers are used to paying for AWS EC2 instances or S3. They're used to that. Oh, I used more storage this month, like that my bill's bigger. They have finance teams who are keeping an eye on that and able to check in on across all their providers, how much am I using, and your entire companies that help you manage that flow, right? There's much more of an appetite for that complexity. The Cursors, the Windsurfs, also had a per user model. So this is where I say those companies are, as far as I could tell, rocket ships of their own. This is where, these seat-based pricing is dead. What they've done is, okay, it's seat-based, but then instead of adding an additional pricing metric, they've implemented usage limits within the tier. Hey, you have this many requests per day or per month for the state-of-the-art models, and then unlimited requests for these lower tier models. And I think that's a much better approach than layering on a direct additional pricing metric. I do caution, though, as folks are the Cursors of the world, they can get away with some very granular underlying cost metrics, like saying number of requests or per token or tokens, because they're talking to developers. I think it's a mistake for most AI-enabled applications that are not selling into a developer audience to make your customers think in terms of tokens. Your customers doesn't want to know what a token is. Right. It's going to be hard to explain. It's going to be hard for your salespeople to explain. It's going to make everything confusing. And so there's probably a better way for you to describe it that more aligns to what your token means in a real world case for your particular end user application. So be careful of lessons you draw from them. Cursor or Windsurf, they have a per token limit. So we'll just borrow that because they're talking to developers who are building applications and understand that they breathe, eat, and sleep that. There's whole ways that you communicate to a developer audience you would never do in other scenarios. I think that's an area where I would really caution folks from layering in any sort of understanding of a token as well. I think on the cost containment side, there are other architectures or patterns that companies are implementing where, for example, there's a whole company called OpenRouter where instead of me building my API directly to hook into OpenAI, I build my connection to OpenRouter and then just tell it, hey, federate to any number of models, can have a write once, use anywhere. We'll see how long that lasts as a standalone company, or I don't know what their profitability long-term metrics are. But the idea there being not every query that you send to an AI system needs genius level intelligence to answer the question. Hey, what are good barbecue restaurants in Austin? I don't need to ask the highest tier AI model like the answer to that question. I can route it to almost probably even the very cheapest model. And there's layers in between. And so companies are adopting that approach behind the scenes to think about, okay, and you see this even if you are a avid AI user like I am, where something like OpenAI will say, hey, like you've run out of O3 queries for your time period. It'll reset at this date. You could still use 4.0 in the meantime. And you could do the same thing behind the scenes as you're trying to ameliorate or mitigate the cost impact for customers. So I would say, don't show your customers your underpants. Showing them your cost structure, they're not interested.
We've talked a lot about hot topics and some of the emerging trends. Let's talk about what's not being talked about right now. Beyond the obvious things like usage-based pricing and AI, and this is a loaded question, obviously. What's a major shift in pricing or monetization strategy that you think SaaS leaders are either underestimating or overlooking right now? Is there something happening under the surface, maybe around ecosystem monetization, partner-led sales, bundled AI services, retention pricing, or even contract flexibility that you believe will matter a lot more in, let's say, the next 12 to 24 months than it does today? Loaded question.
It's a loaded question. One question I often get asked is, will AI do my pricing? And I don't think so. However, so you got me started. I'm going to continue on that train, but a slightly different angle. There's this is it Dunbar's number that reflects, I think it's like 150 of the amount of relationships we can maintain in our life. And they believe there's some evolutionary reason that our brains grew all the connections and the information we need to store about relationships and the relationships between our relationships like requires a certain amount of capacity. And that's very difficult for us to grow beyond that. I've got now somewhere in the order of 5,000 connections on LinkedIn. Definitely not best friends with all of them. I can promise you that. But it's an example of technology allowing us to expand our reach and manage more complexity than we're able to naturally. So as I think about what does that mean for businesses and pricing, AI is having a similar impact where I think this is still playing out. I haven't actually seen this in practice yet. So I want to caveat this because the question was a little bit aspirational, where AI will potentially give us more optionality in managing more complexity than we've traditionally been able to take on as a business. So what do I mean by that? If I go back to sort of marketing 101, it's segmentation, targeting, positioning. The world is very complex. So we want to group customers into similar types that have related needs, contexts, willingness to pay, so that I can create a coherent approach to that group of customers that we all understand differ as individuals, but for purposes of our marketing, go-to-market engine, operate similarly. I guess North Star or peak on that hill was always, can we get to a segmentation of one? But that always has trade-offs of complexity, because if you imagine, okay, we did this work to make the world a simpler model to interact with. And so does AI allow us to manage things like every company of any size probably has a standard MSA or master services agreement that they make all their partners. And if you've ever had to negotiate one of those, you have my sympathies, but getting red lines through there is a huge pain because every exception then has to get managed by the business to understand where their risks lie. Does something like AI enable us to manage contractual flexibility in more differentiated ways than we may previously had capability to do? That could be something as simple as like payment terms or any number of cancellation clauses or any number of nuanced clauses you might have in contracts. If I look at something more direct customer experience, we always talk about something like there's the good, better, best model for creating groups of features together in a way that resonates with, hopefully that resonates with a particular customer segment, and those map to those if you're doing it correctly. But I'm sure any pricing person or marketer or salesperson has been in a situation where someone's, I love everything in your better package, but I need this one thing from the enterprise side. And there's no way I'm 5Xing my per month price to get that one thing. But if I don't get it, I'm walking. Does something like AI's ability to help us manage our complexity finally allow for on the fly configuration of capabilities that allow us to meet customers in a more individualized fashion? So that's my long answer to your aspirational question.
In our world, in the new world, it ties back to something that we separate product from price. What we're finding is that as products get more complex and buyers want to customize the way that they buy and how they pay, you end up with SKU bloat, because you're creating bespoke packages for every single type of customer. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate price from product. And in the process, you have one SKU, and then you can customize it in different ways and bring simplicity back to selling and pricing. That wraps up today's conversation. Thanks, Dan, for your insight. Final question, where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. Just to let me know you heard me on the podcast so I can separate it from the rest of the random LinkedIn spam. If you're interested, I have a website, producttranquillity.com, where I try to blog regularly and give recap takes on episodes like this and other hot takes on the world of pricing. I also have a podcast of my own called SaaS Scaling Secrets, where I interview scale-up B2B SaaS CEOs on beyond the world of pricing, just all the challenges of scaling software businesses. So you can find that wherever podcasts are found.
Awesome. If today's episode taught us anything, it's that pricing isn't just about numbers, it's about storytelling, branding, the experimentation, and staying agile as your market evolves. Whether you're navigating usage-based pricing, launching an omni-channel or hybrid GTM motion, or trying to unify direct sales with product-led growth, the ability to adapt your pricing in real time is where the battle is won. If you found value in this episode, subscribe, share it with a colleague, or drop us a review. If you're looking to future-proof your revenue engine, check out new.io, where pricing, quoting, and billing come together natively inside Salesforce. I'll talk to you next time.